Hey, everybody. So excited to have you guys here with Marina and I in the Herbalism show. We are talking about something that will be fun. Marina even called it in her description the craziest things you've heard, but busting herbal medicine myths. So, within herbal medicine, reason to be able to tune in here is obviously for Marina, but other reasons are in herbal medicine to just start the practice. You're going to have to dispel a lot of issues that society has pushed upon it over the years, and we'll into those and give you some more information and some ammunition to be able to make sure you're taking care of patients in new ways. All right, Marina. I think the battle is on with herbal medicine, right? And just what allopathic medicine and herbal medicine have seemed to have more conflicting issues than I would have anticipated over kind of my career. So when it comes to herbal medicine myths, that we're kind of trying to debunk here. Did you watch the Mythbusters ever, Marina, growing up?
I have come across them. Yes, I remember those.
So what I'm envisioning right now is you and I are just like we're putting this gelatin thing together and then we're going to blow it up in the middle of the field, and that's how we're going to make sure everybody knows how herbalism actually works. But with herbal medicine, when I've come across it, Marina, I guess first thing, make sure you talk about this when I'll throw it over to you. Talk a little bit about your podcast and what's coming out in those episodes, and let's jump right into this one.
Yeah, awesome. So first of all, let's acknowledge RPH Ally and my podcast, the Holistic Pharmacy Podcast, for sponsoring this episode. Thank you, everybody who's been tuning in to these shows. And I also cut them up into snippets and share them on social media. And if you want to head over to my podcast, I have lots of exciting things happening in season 6. I have a show premiering tomorrow, so definitely don't miss that one. And I had one last week with Dr. John Kim, which was amazing. And he's so big on Instagram, so go follow him there. He's got some exciting things that he talks about. So yeah, let's get into busting some myths. I'm excited. And I would love for anyone watching to type into the comments, whether you're watching live or the replay, what are some things that you've heard? What are some beliefs that you do hold about it? Or what is something that you feel like is real or not real? What if something that you're not sure of? And what is something crazy that you may have heard that you don't know what to think about it? So I want to hear everything from you guys, and I'm happy to respond to each and every comment with some perspectives of my own and from my experience and my studies. So yeah, without further ado, something that I've always heard from, especially from the allopathic community and conventional medicine, and what we've been taught as a whole, is really this evidence question. That's one of the first things I always discuss. And it comes up, right, as what do we define as medicine? What's medicinal? Where's the evidence? Because we want to practice evidence-based. That is the gold standard of modern medicine. We want to see randomized clinical controlled studies, double-blinded, placebo, everything like that. Big numbers, big, statistical significance. We want all of that. But all of those come with caveats, right? So those studies are made possible when somebody stands to profit from them and when somebody can sponsor those. And sometimes it's hard to separate that from an inherent bias or agenda. And that's why it really is more difficult to study random plants, because there are so many plants. We can have like a bazillion studies out there studying every single, leaf and flower and root, and each plant part also may have its own composition and properties. So plants are so much more complex than just studying one isolated ingredient, right, that we can standardize and make into, let's say, a drug. So it's difficult to separate the inherent confounding variables when studying plants, number one. Number two, studying of a plant is usually with an agenda, and otherwise it's just not going to happen. And thirdly, yeah, it would just take so long to study all the plants in that way that we wouldn't really have much time or resources to devote to it. So what we do instead to look at the evidence when it comes to plants is actually look into the history and the traditions. So we look at the indigenous cultures that have been using specific plants for one reason or another, whether, through a shamanic dream or through just practice and trial and error. There's these plants that have a lot of evidence and history behind it, and it's documented, whether oral or written, in certain lineages of medicine. And so we look at those and we see, okay, what's the way that it was used? What was the dosage? What was the dosage preparation and the form that was studied and that was used, and for what ailments and in what way and for how long? And so we look at all of those things. I want to say anecdotally, but it's really not just a one-off thing. It usually has a long history so that we can kind of see the safety and efficacy over a long time. It's not just a random fluke or case study most of the time when we're learning about herbs from tradition.
Here's the myth I want to bust, Marina. All of those studies, we put way too much weight in those studies. Like, we think that because it was studied means it's safe. It does not. It just means it was studied. And it doesn't mean it has value either. And I guess that's the one thing to be able to jump into is like number needed to treat, risk profiles, all the elements that are put into those individual randomized controlled trials that we want to just canonize in lots of ways. It's unfortunate because we don't dig into the details of how harmful some of those drugs actually are and how little evidence there is that they're actually helping human beings. And so the one thing that you mentioned that I love is that you're looking at tradition for herbal medicines over thousands of years. And so looking at this like review of herbal medicine, how they've been used, where they've been used, we do the exact same thing in allopathic medicine. We just don't acknowledge it. We put a medication out. We say that it's going to be used for one reason or another. Then we go, oh no, it does have these side effects. It does have these other problems. We weren't aware of these things. It's because we label it in our mind as safe way too early in the individual process, and we don't monitor it appropriately. And there's the myth to bust. You have to monitor everything, no matter what you're taking. The one nice thing about herbs, a little bit less monitoring and side effect profiles with some of them. And that leads us into, I think, the next question from a user on Facebook that asks us, Marina, this. It's hard to know which companies to trust when it comes to their manufacturing processes, et cetera. They feel like that is something that, could be a myth that's out there. Bust it, my friend.
Yeah, I think this is a great point, especially now with everybody kind of questioning, should the FDA step in? There have been some incidences you may have seen in the news with some prominent people that supposedly there was a problem with an herbal medication that they were taking in the form of mulberry. That was one thing that I saw recently. And, it's just so interesting to see how many people jump on the bandwagon, right, of demonizing something without the proper evidence and proof. Like, just because somebody may have ingested a supplement that, by the way, is supposed to be completely safe, mulberry, and especially if you're using it in the natural form and not in a supplement, it's even safer. Mm-hmm. And if you're using the berry or the leaf, and supposedly there was a leaf found, right, in the person's stomach on autopsy, and that's why they think the culprit is the supplement. But how many other factors could have led to the death, and what is the exact cause of death is still kind of unknown. I think it was dehydration. And so it's very, very easy to point fingers, and it almost turns into a witch hunt, right? Where you're just kind of guessing, but so many things that we do in life can contribute to our health or the opposite, that we really, really need to be aware of all those factors and not just blame, something that could have potentially played a minor role. And even if it did, that doesn't mean that every mulberry plant is toxic and we should avoid it. And so, yeah, it does bring up this issue of regulation of these products and what people know about it. And I'm a strong believer of education has to come first whenever you're doing anything. You just have to get the proper education. You can't, out of ignorance, argue for or against something without having all the information. So when it comes to herbs, yes, you want to know what plant it is, what part of the plant it is, what's the dosage, what's a dosage form, right? Those are the basics that you have to know before you even consider taking it. And then considering the side effect and the safety profile of this plant. And again, when you're taking it in natural forms and you're taking it the way it's traditionally been studied in quotations, what I mean is like it has evidence in experiential and empirical use, not necessarily in a gold standard RCT. So when we know that it's a pretty safe plant, the next question is, are we using the right part of the plant? Are we using a standardized extract? Are we using an essential oil? Are we using it in a tea form? Like what's the evidence? Which dosage form has the evidence behind it? And how are we planning to consume it? And if we are sourcing it, either ourselves, when we go out in nature, are we foraging it? Are we identifying it correctly? Are we, again, preparing it correctly? Are we sure that the land where we cultivated it or foraged it is a clean source, right? Because there's so much toxicity and spraying going on as well, and cars and all of these gases that could be off-gassing into the plants. So that's number one when you're going out and getting it yourself. Number two is if you're buying a product, you got to look at the company. So which companies do you trust? Again, I'm a believer of like looking at the historical evidence of this company, seeing who runs the company, what are their policies, have there been historical problems with any of their products produced in the past. And so this comes to a matter of like building a relationship and a trust with companies. And it could just be like somebody's, pretending to have good policies, but in reality, their intention is to, just get rich quick and, manufacture overseas and not do the right thing and, cut costs and not pay attention to the quality. But we want to establish those relationships and trust with local companies, local farmers, again, people who are very transparent in how they're manufacturing it. You can also look up websites that track the quality, such as consumerlabs.com, and really check with them what they rate certain companies as, and then they will test specific products of specific companies, because not every company is created equal and not every product of every company is created equal. So you may prefer like a tea form of a specific herb from one company, and then you may prefer a tincture or a supplement from another company. And so I have built, a relationship and a knowledge base that I tell my followers and my students about which ones that I've either had personal experience of, or my teachers have personal experience of, or I've looked up, their practices and I trust them and I've done the research.
Yeah, I mean, there's some research to be had there. I love that Marina talks about a couple of the resources that you can go to a little more quickly to be able to just assimilate that information. And I know we're running up close to time, Marina, so I'm going to combine two of the questions that we've gotten and put them together real quick. Two of them are these. Herbal medicine is expensive and herbs take too long to work. So those are the two. They're too expensive and they take too long.
Well, the first one is definitely a myth because herbs are easily accessible to us. As I just said, you can literally grow them in your garden or even just your indoor plants. You can have like a little setup on your balcony or indoors even. And so you can have this very abundant, regenerative, renewable source of plants if you are either harvesting it from your own kind of setup and backyard and garden, or you're going out into nature. As long as you leave enough, you don't harvest the whole field of whatever you're harvesting, but you're intentional, right? I also started working with the United Plant Savers. It's a great company to check out to make sure that you're not over harvesting endangered species and we are protecting our diversity of the plants and the land. So, awesome. So it's renewable and it is directly accessible to you. You don't need a middleman necessarily in the form of a manufacturing company to produce your supplement. So on that side of it, it's like food, right? It's food and herbs. They're right there in nature. They grow out there. And so they're not technically expensive. They can get expensive if you're sourcing them from interesting, like, liposomal, very fancy extraction method companies or essential oils. And an essential oil is not equal to an herb. We can have another episode about that. Okay. So depending on how much processing happens, you can skip the processing and get it for very cheap. Okay. Number two, what was number two again? Oh, too long to work. Okay. So yes, that one I would have to say it depends, right? So I definitely think it's not an easy Band-Aid solution, quick fix like a drug. And again, a drug may be beneficial. I'm not arguing with that, but and it works really quick, which is great, what we want sometimes, right? But when it comes to long-term, right? When it comes to long-term management, even if you keep taking the same drug, it may not be addressing why you're having this issue in the first place. You still need to address other things besides taking the drug. So the herb is like those other things. The herb is what you constantly have to work with and ingest and make your whole lifestyle and routine and ritual. Your whole life can be your medicine, or it can be what's making you sick. Right? So which way are you going to go? So if you are choosing to continue to do those practices that are making you healthy over a long term, it's going to add up and it's going to turn into this positive trajectory of a healthy, resilient body. And so, yeah, it may not work right away, but if you keep at it, it's going to eventually, again, have this tipping point where it's working for you.
I think that's fantastic. I mean, I think the myth you busted on that one for how long it works really delves back into a lot of functional medicine thought processes of getting to the root cause of what's going on. And then two, it's as easy as this, Marina. You can take steroids and build muscles really fast. Exercise takes a long time.
Yes.
Lots of benefits for exercise outside of just building muscle, right? And I think the exact same thing with herbs is the entire mentality shift, the way you're taking care of your body, some really positive pieces. Amazing episode, Marina. I know you've got to run to things, and so do I, but it's so nice to have everybody here with us. Thank you for the questions. If you have any others, send them to Marina and I. We'd love to be able to answer them on the show next time.
Yeah, and I'll just end with this. It really depends on where you're starting from, the terrain, right? So if you are way down here, it's going to take you some time to kind of get up leveled, right? If you're taking herbs or anything else for that matter. If you've been exercising consistently day after day after day, the maintenance becomes easy and it doesn't take that long.
Boom. I love it. Get out there and exercise and enjoy some herbs, guys. We'll talk to you here really soon.
Bye. Bye.